The rain wasn't cleansing. It was just cold. Each drop that found the raw skin of her cheek felt like a tiny needle, a punishment for breathing, for existing, for taking up space. Amara huddled deeper into the brick alcove, the damp chill seeping through the thin fabric of her dark purple dress. The sleeveless cut, chosen hours ago for a university arts gala she'd been so excited about, now felt like a cruel joke, exposing her arms to the biting Tokyo night. The fabric was torn at the shoulder, a testament to the hand that had shoved her out the door. Her world had been lectures on Edo period woodblock prints and the quiet hum of the university library. It had been the careful balance of her scholarship, her part-time job translating tourism pamphlets, and the suffocating tension of the apartment she shared with her father and brother. An apartment that was no longer hers. The argument had been the same as always, but the ending was new. The sting on her face where her father's ring had connected, the brutal grip of her brother's hand on her arm. Then the slam of the door, the click of the lock, and the sudden, shocking silence of being utterly alone in the Shinjuku night. That was the moment everything changed. She'd wandered for what felt like hours, the gleaming towers and neon-drenched crowds of the city a blur of indifference. She had ended up here, in a narrow alley that smelled of wet asphalt and discarded ramen, the city's roar muffled to a distant hum. A sound cut through the rhythm of the rain, the soft, deliberate click of expensive leather shoes on pavement. Amara tensed, pulling her knees tighter to her chest, trying to make her body, which she'd always felt was too much, disappear into the shadows. A figure emerged from the far end of the alley, a silhouette of impossible sharpness against the hazy glow of the main street. He walked with a kind of predatory grace, the rain seeming to part for him. He was a man who did not get wet unless he allowed it. As he drew closer, details sharpened into focus. A suit so dark it seemed to drink the light, tailored with surgical precision. The stark white of his shirt cuffs. And his hands. They were resting loosely at his sides, but they held a terrifying stillness, a sense of immense, coiled power. He passed her alcove, and for a heartbeat, she thought he would continue on, another shadow in the night. But he stopped. He didn't turn his whole body, just his head. Slowly. The movement was so controlled it was unnerving. She couldn't see his eyes, hidden in the shadow cast by the building's overhang, but she could feel their weight. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the drumming of the rain. She held her breath, a lifetime of making herself small kicking in. Don't be a problem. Don't be noticed. He took a single step back, bringing him directly in front of her. Now she could see him. His face was carved from stone, all sharp angles and unforgiving planes. His black hair was slicked back, not a strand out of place despite the weather. A faint, intricate pattern of ink, blue, black, and gray, was visible just above the collar of his shirt, a whisper of a hidden world. His gaze dropped from her face to the dark, angry bruise blooming on her cheek, then to the tear in her dress and the raw scrape on her arm. His expression didn't change. There was no pity, no curiosity. Just a flat, unnerving assessment. Who did that to you? His voice was low, a gravelly timbre that seemed to vibrate in the damp air. It wasn't a question of concern. It was a demand for data. Amara swallowed against the lump in her throat. Fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but defiance was a stubborn spark. She had been handled, pushed, and hit enough for one night. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze as directly as she dared. Her own voice came out hoarse, rough with unshed tears. My father. And my brother. She expected him to walk away then. It was a family matter. A domestic dispute. People like him, men who wore power like a second skin, didn't get involved in messes like this. He remained perfectly still. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with a tension so profound it felt like the air was turning solid. He seemed to be processing her words, weighing them. She saw a flicker in his dark eyes, something ancient and cold. It wasn't sympathy. It was something closer to recognition. He extended a hand. It was a large hand, the nails impeccably clean. A simple, open-palmed gesture. An offering. Or a command. Get up. She stared at his hand, then back at his face. This was a mistake. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to let him pass, to become part of the alley's grime until morning. But the alternative was this. The cold, the rain, the bone-deep certainty that she had nowhere else to go. Her old life had been evicted from her body the moment that door slammed shut. Slowly, her limbs stiff and aching, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm and absolute. He pulled her to her feet with an effortless strength that stole her breath. She swayed, dizzy from hunger and shock, and his other hand came up to steady her elbow. The touch was impersonal, a simple matter of physics, but it sent a jolt through her system. He didn't let go. He simply turned and started walking toward the mouth of the alley, his grip on her arm guiding her along. She stumbled to keep up, her bare feet protesting the slick, uneven ground. He didn't slow down. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice small against the city's noise as they emerged onto a quieter, lamplit street. A black car, sleek and silent as a panther, pulled up to the curb as if summoned by his very presence. The back door was opened for me inside by a man in a similar dark suit. The man holding her arm finally looked down at her. "Somewhere dry," he said, his voice flat and final. It left no room for argument. He guided her into the back of the car, the scent of expensive leather and something else, cedar and smoke, enveloping her. He slid in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy, definitive thud. The sound echoed in her chest like a vault being sealed. She was no longer in an alley. She was in a cage. And she had no idea if the man next to her was her savior or the one who would ultimately devour her. The apartment was a study in minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of the Tokyo skyline, a sea of glittering lights that felt a million miles away from the alley. The furniture was all clean lines and dark wood, the air sterile and silent. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a display. The man, she still didn't know his name, had left her in the entryway with a quiet instruction to a severe-looking woman who had appeared from a side room. "See to her." The woman, older and with eyes that missed nothing, led Amara to a large, spa-like bathroom. She laid out a simple gray sweatsuit, thick towels, and an array of toiletries on the marble counter without a word. The unspoken command was clear. Wash away the street. Wash away the evidence of your past life. Amara did, standing under the scalding spray of the shower until the water ran clear and her skin was pink. The bruise on her cheek throbbed in the steam. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush robe, the woman was waiting with a first aid kit. She cleaned Amara's scrapes with an efficient, practiced touch that suggested she had done this many times before. She applied a cream to the angry bruise on her face, her fingers cool and impersonal. "He is waiting," the woman said, her first and only words, before gesturing to the sweatsuit and leaving the room. Dressed in the anonymous gray fabric, her own torn purple dress now vanished, Amara felt like she'd been stripped of her identity. She was a blank slate. His slate. She followed the woman into a large living area. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city he seemed to own. He had removed his suit jacket, and the white shirt stretched taut across his broad back. The sleeves were rolled to his forearms, revealing the dense, intricate artwork of his tattoos. Dragons and waves, rendered in stunning detail, swirled over his skin. Yakuza. The word screamed in her mind. She hadn't just been picked up by a rich man. She had been picked up by the kind of man her father used to warn her about in hushed, fearful tones. He turned, his dark eyes sweeping over her. "My name is Rio," he said. Not an introduction. A statement of fact. "You will stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we will decide what to do with you." Amara's throat felt tight.
Decide?
"I don't belong to you." A flicker of something amusement? Irritation? Crossed his features. It was there, and gone in an instant. "You were alone, injured, and had nowhere to go. In my territory. That makes you my concern. And what concerns me, I control." He moved toward a low table where a tray with a teapot and 2 cups sat. He poured the steaming green tea with a steady, precise hand.
Seat.
She sat on the edge of the leather sofa, her back ramrod straight. He placed a cup in front of her, but took none for himself. He remained standing, a predator surveying his new acquisition. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why help me?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her face, specifically on the bruise. What she did not know yet was that the shape of it, the placement, was a ghost. It mirrored a wound he had seen on another woman long ago. A woman named Akane. A woman he had loved, whose life had been forfeit because of who he was. He had failed to protect her from his enemies, and the shame of it was a cold stone in his gut that never dissolved. He saw Akane's ghost in the defiant tilt of Amara's chin, in the fear she refused to fully show. "Your family dishonored themselves," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. Such weakness is an insult. He wasn't saving her out of kindness. He was correcting an imbalance, erasing an offense that had occurred within his domain. Her pain was a stain on his territory, and he would scrub it clean his own way. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Amara was a prisoner in a gilded cage. She had everything she could need: food, clothes, books that appeared as if by magic, but she had no freedom. The doors were always watched. Rio came and went, a silent, imposing presence. He rarely spoke to her, but she felt his eyes on her constantly. She learned about him in fragments, in the way his men would bow their heads when he entered a room, the hushed, urgent phone calls she would overhear from the next room, spoken in a Japanese too fast and too formal for her to fully parse. The danger of his world began to bleed into hers. One afternoon, while Rio was out, two of his men were speaking in low tones in the hallway. She caught snippets. A rival clan, the Sadogumi. An insult. A breach of territory. They were getting bold. They were looking for a weakness. That evening, Rio returned later than usual. There was a new tension in his shoulders, a lethal energy coiling just beneath his skin. He had a shallow cut on his cheekbone, a stark red line against his pale skin. He walked straight to the bar, pouring himself a whiskey. Amara found herself moving before she thought. She went to the bathroom, retrieved the first aid kit the woman had used on her, and walked back into the living room. She placed it on the bar next to him, without a word. He stopped, the glass halfway to his lips. He looked from the kit to her face. His eyes were dark, unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't just a problem he was managing. He was seeing her. "I know how to clean a wound," he said, his voice flat. "I'm sure you do," she replied, her own voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "But you shouldn't have to." It was a simple statement, but it hung in the air between them, charged with a meaning she couldn't yet define. She was making a choice. She could have hidden in her room, stayed invisible. Instead, she had stepped forward. She had chosen to stay, to engage. He stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then he set the whiskey down and sat on a bar stool. It was an acquiescence, an invitation. Her breath hitched. She opened the kit, her hands surprisingly steady. She dabbed an antiseptic wipe, her touch gentle on his skin. He didn't flinch. He just watched her, his proximity overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint, intoxicating scent of his cologne. Their eyes locked, and the vast, silent apartment shrank to the few inches of space between their faces. The air crackled. It was the first time he had let anyone get this close, to tend to him, in years. It was a trust he hadn't meant to offer, and one she hadn't known she was capable of earning. The world outside, with its rival clans and looming violence, faded away. In that moment, there was only the silent, dangerous contract being drawn between them. That charged moment shifted the atmosphere in the apartment. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy with unspoken things. Rio started spending more time there, working from the large teak desk in the corner of the living room instead of his downtown office. He would watch her as she read, his gaze a physical weight on her skin. She found herself watching him, too, studying the elegant calligraphy of his hand as he signed documents, the way a muscle jumped in his jaw when he was on a difficult call. She told herself it was survival instinct. Know your captor. But she knew it was a lie. The re-hook, the moment the stakes were raised, came a week later. Rio was planning to move her. The Sadogumi were getting too close, their inquiries about the foreign woman he was seeing with becoming more pointed. The plan was to transport her to a more secluded, more secure estate in the Hakone Mountains. The transfer was meant to be discreet, a simple trip in a nondescript sedan. But they were compromised. As their car navigated a narrow street in a quiet residential district, two black vehicles boxed them in, screeching to a halt. The quiet afternoon erupted into chaos. Doors flew open. Men in dark suits, their faces grim, emerged with weapons drawn. Rio's reaction was instantaneous. He moved like lightning, shoving Amara down onto the floor of the car, his body a solid shield over hers. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low, lethal growl she felt in her bones. The world became a cacophony of shouts and the terrifyingly sharp crack of gunfire. The car rocked as bodies slammed against it. Through it all, Rio was an oasis of deadly calm above her, his presence absolute. He shielded her completely, taking the risk, absorbing the threat. This was a language he was born speaking. One of his men in the front seat was hit. He slumped against the window. The driver was returning fire, but they were outnumbered. A rear window shattered, spraying glass over Rio's back. He didn't even flinch. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of fear. This was it. This was the world she had stepped into. Then she saw it. The attacker on her side of the car was trying to wrench the door open. His focus was entirely on Rio. Beside the wounded guard in the front seat, a heavy, metal fire extinguisher had rolled onto the floor. It was just within her reach. Without thinking, without allowing fear to paralyze her, she acted. She grabbed the canister. It was heavy, awkward. The attacker finally tore the door open, his face a snarl of triumph as he raised his gun to aim at Rio's exposed back. In that split second, Amara moved. She twisted, using the cramped space, and swung the fire extinguisher with all her might. She connected with the man's knee. There was a sickening crunch, and he screamed, his leg buckling as he collapsed. His gun clattered to the pavement. She had crossed a line. The art history student who flinched at loud noises had just deliberately, violently, injured a man. She felt a wave of nausea, but also a surge of something else, a fierce, wild adrenaline. She had not been a victim. She had fought back. The tide of the fight turned. The distraction she created gave Rio's driver the opening he needed. The remaining attackers, seeing their advantage lost, retreated to their vehicles and sped away. Silence descended, thick and ringing. It was punctuated only by the ragged sound of Amara's own breathing and the distant wail of sirens. Rio slowly pushed himself off her. He had a shallow graze on his arm, blood seeping through the fine material of his shirt. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that seared her. He glanced at the man groaning on the pavement, then back to the fire extinguisher still clutched in her hands. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't praise her. He reached out and gently took the canister from her white-knuckled grip, setting it aside. Then his hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking over the faded remains of the bruise her father had given her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was raw. She shook her head, unable to speak. That was the moment she almost lost him, and he almost lost her. The reality of it hung between them, more potent than any declaration. Later that night, in the sterile safety of the Hakone estate, a fortress of dark wood and glass nestled in a silent forest, the tension finally broke. She was standing on a balcony, the cool mountain air doing little to calm her frayed nerves. He came to stand beside her. "You should have been scared," he said, not looking at her. "You should have hidden." "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being the one who gets shoved to the floor." He finally turned to face her. "Why didn't you run? When that door was open, You could have run. She met his gaze, the honesty of the moment demanding nothing less than the truth. And go where? Back to an alley? Back to the people who hurt me? You might be a monster, Rio, but you're the first person who hasn't tried to make me feel small. That was the confession. Not of love, but of something far more dangerous and real. It was an acknowledgement of the strange, dark shelter she had found with him. He saw her, not as a burden or a victim, but as a survivor. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes softened for just a fraction of a second. You are not small, Amara, he said, and the way he said her name was different now. It was rougher, more possessive. He said it like it belonged to him. The enemy, however, was not finished. The Sadogumi had been humiliated. A few days later, a package arrived, delivered through a compromised staff member. It wasn't a bomb. It was something more personal, more cruel. Inside was a single, perfect woodblock print, a piece by an artist she had written her final university paper on. It was a message. They knew who she was. They knew her history. And pinned to the corner of the print was a photograph of the front door of her father's apartment building. The threat was unmistakable. They were no longer just targeting him. They were targeting her past to destroy her future. The final confrontation was inevitable. Ryo's honor, his very position, demanded he eradicate the threat of the Sadogumi. His plan was surgical, a meeting brokered on neutral ground where he would deliver his final ultimatum. He intended to leave Amara locked in the safest room of the estate, surrounded by his most trusted men. He saw it as protecting her. She saw it as being caged again. While he was preparing, she replayed every snippet of conversation she had overheard, every name, every location. Her mind, trained to find patterns in art and history, began to connect the dots. The neutral location was a traditional tea house owned by a supposedly independent third party. She remembered hearing the name of that owner in connection with a debt owed to the Sadogumi. It wasn't neutral ground. It was a trap. She couldn't get to Rio directly. He was in a lockdown meeting with his lieutenants. Panic clawed at her, but she forced it down, replacing it with cold resolve. She acted. She had noticed one of the guards, a younger man named Kaido, who watched her with a wary respect ever since the shootout. She sought him out. He's walking into an ambush, she said, her voice low and urgent. The tea house. It's a setup. The owner is in Sato's pocket. Kaido's face was a mask of disbelief. How could you know this? Because they think I'm just a woman he's keeping. They don't think I listen. They don't think I understand, she said, her conviction unwavering. They're counting on him being arrogant. And they're counting on you underestimating me. Something in her certainty broke through his training. He saw the intelligence and the fire in her eyes. He made a choice. He left his post, risking everything to relay her warning. The climax happened without her. She was left in the silence of the estate, the minutes stretching into an eternity of agonizing uncertainty. She paced the room, her hands clenched, no longer a spectator but a player waiting for the outcome of a game she had irrevocably altered. Rio returned just before dawn. He was not unscathed. His suit was torn, and there was a fresh bandage on his forearm. But he was alive. He was victorious. He walked into the room where she waited, his presence filling the space. His men, including Kaido, remained outside, giving them a wide berth. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw everything in his eyes. The violence he had just unleashed, the cold calculation of his world, and a deep, profound acknowledgement of what she had done, of who she was. He didn't say he loved her. The words would have been a lie, too small for the vast, dark thing between them. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a single, heavy, ornate key. He pressed it into her palm. "This is for the main house in Kamakura," he said, his voice rough. "My home. Not a safe house." He closed her fingers around the key. "I am not giving you a cage, Amara. I am giving you a choice." A cost had been paid. The Sadogumi was broken, its leader dealt with in the brutal way of his world. But her own old life was now ash. There was no going back to the university, to the girl who worried about grades and gallery openings. That person had died in a rainy alley. The woman who stood before him now had tasted violence and power, and she had not flinched. He was right. It was a choice. She could take this key, walk out the door, and disappear. Try to build a new life from the wreckage of the old one. Or she could stay. She could step deeper into his world of shadows and blood, a world that was dangerous and terrifying, but where she was finally, undeniably, seen. She looked from the key in her hand to his face. She saw the lethal predator, the cold clan leader. But she also saw the man who had shielded her with his body, who had listened when she spoke, who had given her the power of a choice no one else ever had. Her fingers tightened around the key, the cold metal warming against her skin. She slowly raised her eyes to meet his, her decision clear and absolute, reflected in their dark depths. She would not be rescued. She would reign beside him,